Hey everyone, welcome to the third week of remote learning. Um, and I'm sure that you all know by now that we are not going to be returning in person to school, which is unfortunate and kind of sad, all rolled into one. I understand the need for it, and I understand why, but it's still kind of tough. Um, I'll try not to talk too much about it, but it is kind of, it has been weighing on my mind um, since the announcement. And, I'll probably send out a more personalized message later. But, I just want you guys to know if you're watching this and you're in my class that I'm sad that we're not going to be able to interact in person anymore this year. But if you ever need anything, reach out, send me an email or remind anything, and I'll be happy to help as much as I can. But anyway, in regards to this third week, our two topics are intelligence and motivation. This is two-thirds of a normal unit that we do, so each topic is kind of condensed a little bit in regards to an entire unit. Um, but anyway, intelligence is one of those things in psychology that sometimes gets misunderstood. Some people think intelligence is um, how smart you are and how good a grades you get. And while some of that is true, it's not all of it at all. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But the way the videos are kind of broken down is this first one is about some theories surrounding intelligence, and then the second one is how psychologists and therapists and things like that go about gathering, or excuse me, for testing for intelligence and how we measure intelligence. That's the second part. So not terribly long either one, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. So in psychology, in regards to intelligence, the debate has kind of raged really ever since psychology became a discipline about what is intelligence. Like when you say someone is intelligent, what does that mean? Does it mean they are quote unquote smart? Does it mean they are able to solve puzzles quickly? What is it? In our case, like high school, does it mean they get really good grades? Like, what does intelligence mean? And some of the questions that is it like, can you say intelligent is just this one single ability that applies across the board, or do we have different areas of intelligence that can be combined into like a combination of mental abilities? And also, it's not on the slide, but then the question comes, how much of this is nature? How much of it is nurture? How much are we born with? How intelligent are we from birth, or is it something that we can learn um, through our experiences? Um, so intelligence is one of those things that there's a lot of debate in a lot of different areas about what does it mean to be intelligent, and what does how we measure that. And we'll kind of get into some of those over you know over the next couple or over the next two videos. But that you can see the definition there by David Weschler, who we're going to talk more about in the second video. But Weschler came up with the Weschler Intelligence Scale, which is it's a group of tests that are used to measure intelligence. So, but his definition is the global capacity to think rationally, act purposely, and deal effectively with the environment. So, think, act, and deal with whatever is thrown at your way. The ability to do that in a way that is accepted and makes sense in the world is kind of the basic definition of intelligence. So, um, and there are a couple of theories of intelligence. The first one kind of came about when this guy here, Charles Spearman, was his name. He was um, a British psychologist who really this is the only time you're really ever going to hear his name in this class, and that was because he spent the vast majority of his career focusing on intelligence and how to kind of how to measure it out and all this. Side note, he looks incredibly like Mr. Furman. If you've ever had Mr. Furman as a sub at Panther Creek, it's scary how much Spearman and Furman favor each other. But anyway, that's a side note. But he was interested in measuring mental abilities, and what he found through the tests and the studies that he did was he found that individuals who scored pretty high in one area of mental abilities tended to also score very high in some other areas. Now, he only really tested for 4 specific abilities. You can see them down there at the bottom: verbal, spatial, numerical, and mechanical. Verbal being like language and reading and comprehension and things like that. Spatial being like pattern, size, shapes, all that kind of stuff. Numerical, obviously mathematical stuff. And then mechanical is kind of more like tactile, physical stuff, physical abilities. So what he found was that individuals who scored pretty high on like mathematical and numerical reasoning also tended to score pretty high on, say, verbal or spatial reasoning. And because of that, he didn't think that, or he didn't hold the opinion that we all had various different types of intelligence abilities. He believed that we had a single skill, intelligence, quote unquote, that we just then applied to whatever it was that we were dealing with, whether it was mechanical, numerical, spatial, whatever. So he came up with this theory that intelligence was had a single underlying factor, which he called general intelligence. And he termed it general intelligence and used a lowercase g to represent that. And sometimes it's called the G factor or just G, quote unquote. And he expressed it in a way that was a single number, kind of like IQ scores are nowadays. Don't worry about the scale that he used or anything like that, but he did measure it in numbers. The higher the number, the higher the general intelligence, much like our IQ scores today. But again, he believed that we are all born with a general ability of intelligence, a G factor, general that we apply to any scenario that we are presented with. So if we are intelligent by default, according to Spearman, and again, remember, this is just a theory. This is not proven. This isn't fact. It's just a theory. Spearman would say that if we have a high general intelligence, then we would do well in really any area of specific abilities if we have that high number. So anyway, that's his theory. He was of the mindset that intelligence is a single skill or single ability that we all have that just gets kind of adapted and spread around depending on what issue or problem we are faced with. Okay, so that's Spearman. General intelligence, G factor, all that is the same thing. And now this guy here in the bottom right, I'll explain who the guy is there on the left in just a minute if you don't already know. But Howard Gardner did not believe that we all have a single ability. And the reason that he didn't believe that was he was kind of a combination of a psychologist and a sociologist. He looked at a lot of different cultures and societies throughout the world and looked at like what they believed meant, or like what he believed that intelligence was in those societies and cultures, and how that translated across across those cultural divides. And he also was really involved in the study of savant syndrome or savants, which, if you don't know what a savant is, or like I said, savant syndrome, it is someone who possesses an incredible ability in some areas, and yet they also possess next to no abilities in other areas. And normally on class day, when we study this, I would show a clip from a video called "The Boy with the Amazing Brain," and it's about a kid who has kind of been diagnosed with savant syndrome, but he's in the anomaly. He can live a pretty normal life. Most savants can't. The picture on the left here on the slide is a guy named Kim Peek, and he is who the movie, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man or heard of Rain Man or whatever, he is who inspired that character. He is or was unfortunately, he passed away in I think 2008 or 2009. He was born and was believed to have very low intelligence and was told by doctors that he would never be able to be successful in school or anything like that. And he ended up, he started showing extreme abilities, like being able to read multiple pages at once, like have one eye read one page, one eye read the other. He retains it like 98% of whatever he reads. Like his memory is incredible. In other words, he had these insane abilities, but he couldn't live by himself. He couldn't tie his shoes. He couldn't hold down. He had to be cared for. And because of studying people like Kim and some other savants who had similar abilities in other areas like art and things like that, Howard Gardner believed that you can't say, because of people like that, you can't say that intelligence is a single ability, because they debunked that rumor. They debunked that theory, not a rumor. They shatter that theory that says if we all have a single ability, then we should be able to adapt it to any situation that we're presented with, and these people can't. These savants can't. Yes, they have incredible abilities um, in some areas, but very little intelligence or abilities in other areas. Um, if you've ever, and this is not someone it's a similar to autism, but it's not exactly the same thing. Um, but savants are, you would know if you've ever met one or ever been around one, they are just unreal with some of their abilities. And like I said, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, which was the late '80s, so well before your time, but if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, he is the person who inspired that character that Dustin Hoffman played in that movie. Um, and there's a documentary. Just one last side note, and I'll move on. There's a documentary called the Real Rain Man, which is about an hour-long documentary on Kim Peek, and it's really, really fascinating if you ever get a chance to watch it or you're interested in something like that. Anyway, back to what Gardner was saying. So Gardner believed that because of people like savants and because of the definitions of intelligence across cultures and societies, he believed that it is not a single ability. So he came up with a theory called multiple intelligences theory, that where he defined 8 different abilities that tend to be recognizable across cultures, no matter where you are in the world. These are 8 things that we all tend to have some areas of expertise in. And there's the chance that someone might have very high abilities in some and very low in others, but it's not a single ability that we kind of divide amongst it. It's it can be specific. So here are those 8 things. And again, I'm basically just going to go through them real quick. So musical, pretty self-explanatory. Bodily kinesthetics, just like, again, body, exercise, those kind of things. Interpersonal, social skills, basically. Verbal linguistic, word smart, reading, those kind of things. And logical, mathematical is obviously math. Naturalistic is nature, like, the world, basically outside. Um, uh, Intrapersonal is kind of being, uh, kind of introvert, being able to look inside oneself. And then visual spatial is like artistic abilities. So Gardner believed that all of these 8 things, we each have different levels of expertise, and I think that there's some truth to this, because I think if you look, like, just I'll use myself as an example. Obviously, I feel like I have um I feel like there are a couple of these on here that I feel like I have pretty high abilities in, and then others that I have very low. Like music, I have zero musical talent whatsoever. I love music, but I can't play an instrument. I can't sing. Never been able to have any skill whatsoever in that. Same thing, artistic. I mean, you've seen me draw on the board. It's a disaster. So, but I mean, I feel like in some other areas, mostly, I feel like I'm pretty good verbal linguistic, bodily kinesthetic, naturally. I feel like I got pretty high, but like not in others. So Gardner believed that it's not like we all have these like, it's not like we have like wait a minute, what am I trying to say here? Like an amount of points that we get to spread around. That's not what he's saying either. He just says that like, you know, some people just tend to be higher in these areas of intelligences than others are, and that's when you combine them all together, that's that person's intelligence. So that's a theory. Uh, and then this last theory, and then and then I think we're done. Is very very similar to Gardner. And it's the triarchic theory, which basically all you need to know about this guy here on the right, his name is Robert Sternberg. Um, he basically just took Gardner's theory and condensed it down to three things rather than eight. Same idea. We all have different areas of abilities and skills, and it's just divided amongst these three instead of eight. So analytical intelligence is, logical analysis, evaluation, basically the kind of mathematical, scientific kind of stuff, the analytical intelligence kind of solving stuff. Creative is the creativity, artistic, musical, and artistic skills would fall under here. Um, and then practical is like the quote unquote like street smarts type thing, like the social abilities and being able to understand social norms and things like that. So it's the same kind of idea as Gardner in that we all have these different areas of abilities and expertise, but it just reduces it down to three instead of eight. So, and then, so there's that. And then the last one is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, sometimes called social intelligence, basically this is just how we use emotions to interact and survive in the world, essentially. So perceiving, understanding, managing, and using. Um, this is interesting. Like the emotional intelligence is interesting because I feel like there are people who um, might not necessarily have very high levels of this, but are incredibly smart and incredibly talented. But their social or emotional intelligence might not be where you think it would be, if that makes sense. So, like, we all have that friend who isn't very good at picking up on emotions. I mean, we all tend to have that, and there's nothing wrong with the person. It's not like it's not like they have issues or problems or anything. It's just that they may crack a joke at an inappropriate time, or they may not necessarily understand that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be trying to make people laugh at this scenario or whatever. I mean, it's just like stuff like that. Like that's low levels of an area of emotional intelligence. Like perceiving is like recognizing emotions, understanding, being able to predict emotional states based on factors and things like that. Managing, being able to express emotions properly in certain scenarios, and then using it for creative, adaptive thinking. Like those are areas of social intelligence. I used to not even go over this a couple years ago. It started showing up on AP stuff, so we threw it in there at the end. But most of the time you see Spearman and Gardner and Sternberg, and then, like I said, emotional intelligence just kind of gets thrown on here at the end. But it is something that I feel like is starting to be kind of more widely discussed because emotions do play a large role in our ability to solve. I mean, think about it. If you get very emotional about something, you don't think about things the same way that you normally would. You don't go about solving problems the same way that you normally would. So, emotional intelligence is being able to understand that and being able to use your emotions for or in the way that they need to be used in order to solve problems or whatever. So anyway, I think that's it. Yep, that's it for the first video. So the next video, like I said, is going to be on the ways we measure intelligence and IQ scores and intelligence tests and things like that. So see you guys then.